Well, good morning, everybody, and good evening or afternoon for those of you who are in other time zones. So what I'd like to do is just very quickly and briefly show you some of the things that Chris just described. And I'd like to start, of course, with the business process because that's really always where you start. So when you're doing decision discovery, you always want to create some kind of a process diagram. You know, it may be a full-blown process improvement initiative project that where you're doing decision discovery as part of that, or it may just be, a few decisions that you want to document, and you need to understand where those sit in the overall business operations. And the way you're always going to go about doing that is you're going to start with some kind of process diagram. And so, as Chris mentioned, you're probably familiar with decision tasks. These are not new in Blueworks Live. But what's changed is that previously you could describe a simple decision table along with your decision tasks, whereas now, as Chris mentioned, decisions are actually a first-class artifact in the Blueworks Live repository. And as such, from the process diagram, you can actually navigate to a decision that's associated with a decision task like this, and it will actually take you into the decision diagram. And let me just give you a little brief overview of what the Blueworks Live decision diagram looks like. So this is the root decision, as Chris pointed out, and every decision has comes to a conclusion, a single output. And in this case, for example, eligible for sale, this is the decision that we're making, the thing that we're trying to decide. And each decision can have any number of inputs, or these are facts that are being considered, basically. And decision inputs, they can either be outputs from other subdecisions, as Chris pointed out. You're often composing decisions of subdecisions because there's rich and well-organized areas of subject matter expertise. As you delve into a decision, you start to discover these different components, if you will, that need to be broken out and delved down to individually. And so, for example, these dependency lines, each of these indicates that there's a subdecision, and the higher level decision above that is consuming the output, basically, and it's using the output of those subdecisions to come to its own conclusion. You can also have data inputs to a decision, and these are basically, these would come from where you would expect, typically from some kind of database, and would be passed into the activity in the process as an input. And so that's how those would be passed to the decision ultimately. But here, for example, we've hovered over this number. It tells us how many data inputs have been defined for a particular subdecision, and it shows us the names of those data inputs. We can expand to show more information on the diagram. So we can show all of the outputs. We can show all of the data inputs, which will give us the ability to see, we may want to explore, for example, this number of units right here. This is an example of a piece of information that's actually being used within multiple subdecisions. We can see patterns like that this way. So this is the decision diagram in Blueworks Live, and it's based on the style and the principles in the draft 1.0 specification of the OMG Decision Model and Notation Standard, which is called DMN. And this is something that will be available for public review later this summer. And it's really an emerging standard around decision modeling that all of the different vendors and products that support this kind of capability are sort of rallying around. And so the graphical elements and some of the conventions that you see in our decision diagram come from the DMN initiative. And so as that evolves and as it's becomes public, we'll probably support more of those elements. So let's take a look at if you wanted to create a new decision, what you would go about doing. And for that, I would typically do it from the space. And you have the ability now to create a new decision, much like you would create any other sort of artifact within a Blueworks Live space. So let's go ahead and create a decision kind of like the one we just looked at, so I don't have to think too much about what I'm typing. Because I can't type and talk at the same time. I apologize in advance. And so we compose a decision, and it brings us into the diagram, and it populates our root decision with the name of the overall decision that we just provided. And the first thing we want to start doing is adding our input. Adding our output names. And as we, in this example, let's say we start talking to the subject matter experts, and we discover that there are a number of different dimensions, actually, that we need to look at in order to make this overall determine eligibility of this mortgage loan. So we start to map out the various pieces of the decision, and the subject matter expert tells us that, you've got to look at not just the loan, but you've also got to look at the property. For example, there's a number of important criteria around property eligibility that have to be taken into consideration here. And bear with me here. Like I said, I can't type and talk at the same time. And then, there's one other very important subdecision here that's performed, where we really have to look at the borrower and determine whether or not the borrower is a risk that we can take when originating this particular loan. So let's go ahead and add that subdecision. And once again, for each decision, we want to name its output. What is it that this is deciding? And let's just say it's determining whether or not the borrower is eligible. And this is kind of the way you would go down decomposing. And so we talk to our subject matter expert, and we start asking, so how do you assess loan eligibility? And they tell us, you've got to look at the maximum LTV guidelines, for example, to make sure that the loan-to-value ratio is within those guidelines. And so we say, okay, well, let's capture this. Let's document this. We've got another subdecision here that's going to determine the maximum LTV. And you said we've got to compare something. We've got to make sure that the loan-to-value ratio that's coming in off the loan application is actually within those guidelines. Is that what you said? Yes. So we added data input here along with that subdecision. And is there anything else important at this point that we need to do? And our subject matter expert may say, well, yes, there's, you have to make sure that the loan amount doesn't exceed the loan amount criteria for sale of these particular types of loans. And so we ask, well, how do you do that? Well, you've got to look at the original principal balance from the loan application. And so we add that, and then they tell us that there's a really complex logic around calculating the maximum loan amounts, and that's something that we also have to create a subdecision for. And so let's add that, determine max loan amount. And so now we've kind of got this decision that we've created the shape for, the inputs and the outputs, and the various levels to it. And now the next thing we want to do is, now that we've kind of got the structure of our decision defined, we would go and define the decision logic. And so to do that, you would go to the Decision tab, and here you can see all the inputs, and I've got some typos, but we won't be too concerned with those for the moment. And Blueworks Live will ask you if you would like it to generate a decision table for you from the inputs and output on the decision diagram. So let's say yes, and here we've got a nice decision table with some typos in it, and we can start populating the values in that decision table. And for those of you that have used the Blueworks Live decision tables, there's a few changes. We've made it easier to copy and paste rows, for example. So I could take I could take blocks of rows, and 20 rows, however many I needed to, which is very useful, as Chris pointed out, with some of the large decision tables. And I can copy and paste and make changes to those rows. And let's see here. Let's just finish this out and say that we've got one more criteria here. Let me just add that. And we've got a decision table that basically assesses the eligibility at the highest level here, this root decision, based on these various subdecisions and data inputs. So that's kind of just a very, very quick look at how you would go about modeling a decision. And now what I'd like to do is, once you've got that decision, you've got a number of important characteristics associated with the decision that you may want to capture. And these might be things like Chris pointed out a few of them, and as he mentioned, some of those are very similar to properties that you can capture on the activities on the process side. But business motivation, typically you want to capture the business objectives that this decision seeks to achieve here. Business owners, very much what you might think of. Experts, same thing. Sources, they're typically definitive sources of knowledge for decisions, and you might have big regulatory guides, policy manuals, work aids, other authoritative documents describing the decision. So you want to capture those here. There's often the need to capture key performance indicators to document the business metrics that you use to assess the quality and outcome of the decision, and you would do that here. And then a couple of things that Chris pointed out are really important when for example, automation is a potential goal for your project. And here, it's really around the volume, for example. So if this is a decision that's made hundreds of thousands of times a day, it might be a good candidate for automation. So we capture that kind of volume information. And the change dynamics of the decision similarly are very useful when you're trying to assess which decisions might be good candidates for automation. And here, if it's decision logic that changes very frequently, may be a good candidate. So you can capture those dynamics here. And those are the properties the new properties that we've added for decisions. And we expect that there will be, some more that we'll be adding in the future as we get feedback from you all as you start to use these capabilities, and let us know what else is really important. So those are decision characteristics. And, once you have a decision and, say there's an existing decision and you're trying to understand it, maybe you're new to the area and someone else has done the work, view mode in the decision diagram in Blueworks Live is a really great way to do that because, you can select each of the elements of the decision diagram and you can see all of the details in the right-hand pane. So, for example, all of the characteristics that we just walked through are all right here. You don't have to go anywhere else to see them. You can link to them. You can look at all of the inputs, output. You can view the decision tables right here in line and any policy documents, as well as comments. So I can, comment and collaborate with teammates around decisions and subdecisions. And as I navigate between the subdecisions in the decision diagram, of course, it changes. And I find it really useful to be able to pull up the decision table right here in the context of the decision diagram as you're working with it. I think that's a really great feature. So that's view mode for the decision diagram. And then some of the other things really that Chris talked about, these are not new features. They're available today when you're working around your processes. You're already using these. But I just want to touch on a few of them because they're really useful in the context of decision discovery as well. And so something that I'm sure you're all familiar with already is the activity stream. And for decisions, this is, equally, if not more useful, because the ability for me to go in and see all of the changes that were made to decisions in my space and who made those and the detailed explanation or description of what that change was, that's very, very useful if, say, for example, someone's gone in and made significant changes to decision logic, and having a record of that and being able to go back and look at that is super useful to me. And, of course, you can post to the stream just as you're able to today. This isn't new either, but it's also, very, very useful in the context of decision discovery and validation, and comments showing up. So any comments that we've left on different components of a decision, being able to see them in the activity stream as well. So that, like I said, this is not new, but it's really useful in the context of decisions. And so is the online chat, actually. There's nobody online in this particular environment that I'm working in right now. But if there were, it would be really useful, for example, for me to get a link to this decision and just paste it into the chat window with them, and they could navigate to this decision, and we could collaborate remotely around it and make changes to it and see those changes in real time, just like you can on the process diagram. So this is really useful for collaboration. And then Chris talked about validation and Blueworks Live Work, the lightweight automation capabilities. And this is really, I think it's super easy to set up these kinds of workflows, and I think they're really useful for helping govern the workflow around reviewing and validating decisions. And so you're probably quite familiar with this already, but in automating a process, you would just set up a process app, and I'm not going to go through all the typing associated with it because it's not new functionality, but we'd set up a process app and we'd configure it, and the configuration of it would look something like this. Let me just pick one up that's already been started. For those of you who haven't used the work tools, this is what the configuration menu would look like. I'd basically be building the template, specifying what the button should say for when somebody wants to launch this particular workflow, what they would see. It would have instructions that they would get when they do that, and then they'd have specific information that they'd need to enter when they launched it and things like that. And there would be reviewers and approvers designated. And once they've shared a process app that's been configured, then of course it looks something like this, which I'm sure is not new to any of you. But you can actually work through the various review and approval steps and keep track of those for your decision. So once again, not new, but really useful. And I think Chris also mentioned something else that I think is, once again, super useful on the decision side, and that is the ability to have a revision history. So just like we do on the process side, the ability to take a snapshot of a decision and restore to a previous snapshot. This makes me as a author or somebody who's actually defining and composing decisions and the decision logic much more comfortable, for example, making significant changes to the diagram or the logic. So let's say I started getting more input and feedback around this decision, and I started refactoring it. I can actually move things around and reorganize it, and let's say at some point I say, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Well, undo is obviously a great tool for this sort of thing, but to be honest, if I'm in this kind of decision table that we looked at previously, that may be kind of large and have a lot of very complex logic associated with it, I'm going to be much more comfortable if I've just taken a snapshot of the decision before I go in to make these changes and keep that around for a while. But of course, snapshots can also be used to kind of keep track of the effectivity of policy changes and guideline changes. So when the logic of a certain decision is to become effective at a certain point in time, your snapshot and revision history, can give you a good window into the different points in time that the decision's changed, and you can keep versions of the decision that reflect those different changes and things like that. So I think there's just really one more thing that I wanted to point out, and that's, obviously after you've started working with decisions a bit, you may have quite a few of them in the Blueworks Live library, and so of course the search tool is going to be something that you'll want to use to navigate and find decisions of interest. And so here, for example, if the text string that we're searching on is either within the name of the decision, or maybe it's the column header for one of the decision tables. Blueworks Live will return that in the search. And the filter, it's also a good way of kind of narrowing down especially if you spell right, of narrowing down what you're searching for. And so I knew I have a decision out there that starts with determine, and so this will sort of narrow things down and filter, and I can use, say, for example, I want to sort by date, and so this is going to bring me up my most recent version of this decision that I was working with. And then once I've found the decision that I'm interested in, there's a lot of other information I can find right here without going anywhere else. As Chris pointed out, the where used capability, for example, this will show me everywhere that this decision is used throughout my processes. So one of the big, differences here with the new release is that decisions are reusable. And so you'll start to see that certain decisions may actually be used in multiple processes, and it's very easy to find out where those are through this where used capability. So you can see the activity in the process as well. And if, as we know from the beginning of this little demo, the process diagram that we started out with, the decision task was actually called determine eligibility for sale. So, and we can navigate back to that decision task if we like to from here. And Chris also mentioned that you're able to export decision information to Excel now. And let me just bring up the Excel spreadsheet, just give you a flavor for the information. For those of you that have used the space export or the process export, it's a real similar way of organizing information. So you have all of the elements that make up the decision that you've exported, in the Decision Items tab. And then you've got all the characteristics of that decision, each in its own tab. And I won't go through everything because it's kind of straightforward. But it is really useful, I think, for, in particular, if you've got really large decision tables, it's a great way to print them out for review and to mark them up and that kind of thing. So I don't think I have anything else really to say at this point. I just wanted to give you all a quick demonstration so you would see what it is that Chris was describing. And if you're interested in this stuff, there's going to be an in-depth IBM Red Paper and video tutorial on decision discovery with Blueworks Live published in a couple of weeks, and we'll make those available to you all on the Blueworks Live site as soon as those are published. So you'll have some really great resources to delve further into this if you so desire.